At my brother's engagement party, my mom laughed. Kieran's becoming a real man, and you're still just floating around. I didn't say anything. Then a man walked in holding a child's hand. I'm looking for Danielle. I'm her husband. He stepped inside, eyes locked on the bride-to-be. I could feel the tightness in my shoulders the moment I pulled up to my parents' lake house. My name is Malik. I'm 29 years old and I live in Seattle. The sign at the end of the driveway read, "Welcome to the lake," in blue and silver letters. It felt more like a warning. Inside, the party was in full swing. Blue and silver balloons were tied to every chair. The dining table was covered with a white cloth and loaded with shrimp cocktail, deviled eggs, and homemade punch that my mother bragged about to anyone who would listen. I took a breath before walking in. My younger brother Kieran was already surrounded by family, his fiancée Lila beaming beside him. Everyone was there to celebrate them. My brother's engagement, his real man moment. It was the kind of thing my mother lived for. My mother's smile was bright when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Malik," she said, coming over and kissing my cheek. "Glad you could make it, even if you're still single." Her tone was light, but I felt the sting behind it. She always managed to slip that in. I gave her a small smile. Wouldn't miss it. She clapped her hands together and turned back to Kieran and Lila. "Look at you two," she said, touching Lila's arm like she was a piece of fine china. "Getting married, starting a family, what every real man does when he's ready." I stood there, my hands in my pockets, feeling invisible. Kieran shot me a small, apologetic look. He knew how it was. How Mom never let me forget that my life, my job, my choices weren't enough. "You know, Malik," she said, lowering her voice a little so just the people near us could hear, "I just worry about you sometimes. All those trips, all that running around. Don't you ever want to put down roots? Like your brother?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "I'm doing fine, Mom." "Fine," she said, the word drawn out like she didn't believe it. "But there's more to life than just drifting." I swallowed the frustration that was building in my chest. I've been living on my own terms for years now. Working as a travel photographer, going wherever the light and the landscape called me. I made good money, had a tight circle of friends back in Seattle, and I loved what I did. But to her, that didn't count. It didn't matter that my pictures had been in magazines, or that I'd built a life that was entirely mine. In this house, if you weren't like Kieran, settling down, making a family, you were nothing. I walked over to the fireplace, the one we used to gather around every winter as kids. A framed photo of Kieran and Lila was on the mantel, both of them looking perfect in matching winter sweaters. I could see my reflection in the glass, the faint outline of someone who never really fit in. My cousin Tiffany walked by, balancing a plate of deviled eggs. "Malik," she said, her tone warm but her eyes searching. "Still out there chasing the next adventure?" I forced a smile. "Something like that." She laughed. "You always were the wild one. But it's nice to see Kieran settling down. Real grown-up stuff, you know?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. It was easier to stay quiet, to let the words bounce off me and keep moving. But inside, I could feel it, the old weight pressing down on my chest. The way my family always measured worth by what they could see. The ring, the house, the kids. The way I never measured up. I thought about leaving early. I thought about grabbing my bag and just driving back to Seattle before the night was over. But then I looked over at Kieran, standing there with that hopeful smile, and I knew I couldn't do that. Not tonight. So I stayed. I smiled when I had to. I laughed at the jokes, even the ones at my expense. But inside, I was already packing up. Because I knew, no matter how much I loved my family, I'd never belong here the way Kieran did. And as the night stretched on, I kept reminding myself, this wasn't my home. It never really had been. A couple hours in, the clinking of glasses signaled it was time for the toast. I was standing in the kitchen doorway, balancing a tray of drinks that Lila's mother had asked me to pass around. The chatter of the party quieted down as my mother stepped forward, raising her glass high. "To Kieran and Lila," she began, her voice clear and sure. "May your love be a testament to what it means to be responsible, committed, and true." Her eyes shone with pride, and the room filled with warm applause. I set the tray down on the sideboard and tried to blend into the shadows. But then her gaze turned to me, and I felt every set of eyes follow. "And of course," she continued, her lips curving into that sweet, dangerous smile she saved for moments like this, "not everyone's cut out for real commitment." The words hung in the air. A hush fell over the room, a beat of silence that felt like it stretched for hours. Then someone snorted, maybe an uncle I hadn't seen in years, and laughter broke out like a wave. It wasn't awkward laughter. It was genuine. Everyone seemed to find it hilarious that I was the punchline. I swallowed hard, my face flushing hot. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but the blood was roaring in my ears. My hands trembled just a bit, and I had to grip the edge of the sideboard to steady myself. "Oh, come on," my mother said, still smiling like it was all in good fun. "You know I'm just teasing. Malik's always been more of a free spirit." I looked at her, my mouth opening and then closing again. What was I supposed to say? That I'd built a life I was proud of? that I was happy, even if it didn't look like theirs. I didn't say anything. I just picked up the tray again, the glasses rattling against each other as I carried it back into the kitchen. My heart was pounding so hard I felt like I was going to be sick. In the kitchen, I set the tray down and took a long breath. The laughter from the other room still echoed in my head. I pressed my palms against the countertop, trying to keep my hands from shaking. Don't let them see you flinch, I told myself. Don't give them that satisfaction. But it stung. It always stung, no matter how many times I told myself it didn't matter. I'd been called a drifter, a dreamer, a kid who never grew up. I'd heard it all before, but tonight, it felt sharper, more final. Like I was being put in my place in front of everyone who mattered. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Kieran standing there, his face pinched with embarrassment. Malik, I'm sorry, he said quietly. She shouldn't have said that. I shook my head. Don't worry about it. But he wouldn't let it go. She doesn't mean it the way it sounds. You know how she is. I gave him a small smile, one that didn't reach my eyes. Yeah, I know how she is. He looked like he wanted to say more, but then someone called his name from the other room, and he left. I leaned back against the counter, letting out a shaky breath. I told myself I didn't care what they thought of me, that I was happy with the life I'd built, one that didn't need their approval. But the truth was, standing there in that kitchen, with the laughter still echoing in my head, I felt smaller than I had in years. I picked up one of the empty glasses from the tray and stared at it for a moment, the way the light caught on the rim. Then I set it down and went back to the party, my shoulders squared and my face calm. Because even if they never saw me, even if they never understood, I wasn't going to let them see me break. About an hour later, the party was starting to wind down. Lila was opening a stack of gifts on the living room floor, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Her mother handed her a small velvet box, and Lila's smile widened as she opened it to find an engraved necklace. The room filled with a chorus of "ah," and my mother beamed like she'd personally orchestrated every perfect detail. I was standing by the window, half listening, half trying to ignore the ache in my chest. My phone buzzed in my pocket, some notification from work, probably, and I was reaching for it when the doorbell rang. The chatter in the room quieted. My father, always the host, was about to get up when I said, "I'll get it," needing an excuse to step away. I walked to the front door, pausing for a second to wipe my palms on my jeans. When I opened it, I froze. A man stood there, maybe in his early 30s, with dark hair and tired eyes. Beside him, a little boy clutched a toy airplane, his small hand wrapped tight around the man's fingers. "Hi," the man said, his voice low and tense. "I'm looking for Danielle. Danielle Morgan. I'm her husband." For a moment, the words didn't make sense. Danielle? I opened my mouth to tell him he must have the wrong house, but then I saw the way his eyes flicked past me into the crowded living room. Before I could say another word, he stepped forward, pulling the little boy with him. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a little louder now. "I'm here for my wife." I turned, watching him walk right past me like I was nothing more than the doorman. My heart was pounding in my ears. The room went dead silent as he stepped inside. Lila, no, Danielle, apparently, stiffened, her hand frozen on the necklace. Kieran turned to her, his brow furrowed in confusion. The man's gaze swept the room, landing on Lila. "Danielle," he said again, his voice almost pleading. "What the hell is going on here?" The little boy clutched his toy airplane tighter, his eyes wide as he looked around at all the strangers. Lila's face was pale, her lips parted like she couldn't find the words. My mother was the first to speak, her voice a brittle laugh. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake." "No mistake," the man said, his eyes never leaving Lila's face. "I've been looking for her for a week. She said she needed a break, some time to think. But then I find out she's here, getting engaged to another man." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Kieran's hand fell from Lila's shoulder, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to catch his breath. I stood back by the door, feeling like I'd been yanked out of my own body. Everything else fell away, the blue and silver decorations, the half-eaten cake, my mother's carefully crafted image of the perfect family. It all cracked and crumbled in that single moment. Lila didn't say a word. She just stared at the man, her eyes filling with tears. Finally, she whispered, "You weren't supposed to find me here." The man's shoulders slumped, and he let out a shuddering breath. "Danielle," he said softly, "we have a son. You can't just disappear." The little boy looked up at her then, his big eyes searching her face. "Mommy," he said in a small voice. Lila let out a sob, covering her mouth with her hand. No one moved. No one spoke. Kieran's face was ashen, and my mother's mouth was open in shock. My father stood there like a statue, his hand frozen around a glass of wine. And me? I just watched. For once, all the family's judgment wasn't aimed at me. It was like I'd become invisible. In that moment, I didn't feel small or ashamed or like I didn't measure up. I felt still. Like I was seeing the truth for the first time. Because all those years of biting my tongue, of trying to be the good son, the good brother, they never saw me. And now, finally, they were seeing something else. The perfect little world they built was just a house of cards. And it was starting to fall. The room stayed silent for a beat, no one quite sure what to do. Then Kieran found his voice. What are you talking about? He stammered, looking from Lila to the stranger. You're married. The man's eyes were hard as he nodded. Danielle Lila Morgan. That's her name. We've been married for 6 years. This is our son, Caleb. The little boy clutched his toy airplane to his chest and looked around, wide-eyed and silent. Lila, Danielle, covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook as she tried to hold herself together. I never meant for it to happen like this, she whispered. My mother took a step forward, her face pale. There must be some mistake, she said, her voice almost pleading. Lila, tell him. Tell him this isn't true. Lila dropped her hands and looked at Kieran, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I thought I could start over. I thought if I left it all behind, I could. I don't know, be someone new. Kieran's face went white. He stumbled back a step, like the air had been knocked out of him. You lied to me, he said softly. All this time, you lied to me. The man, her husband, looked at her like he couldn't believe he was seeing her like this. A week ago, he said, his voice tight, you told me you just needed time, that you were overwhelmed. And I believed you. I've been calling, texting. I've been driving around with Caleb in the backseat, trying to find you. The little boy looked up at Lila, his bottom lip trembling. Mommy, are we going home now? Lila reached for him, but he shied away, clutching his toy even tighter. My mother's face had gone from shock to something closer to horror. She looked around the room like she was seeing it all for the first time, like every perfect detail she'd so carefully arranged was just a cheap stage prop. My father set his glass down on the table and took a step back, his mouth a hard line. Kieran's voice rose, shaking and furious. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say you were married? That you had a son? He let out a bitter laugh, tears in his eyes. We're supposed to be getting married, Lila. And you already are married. Lila reached for him, but he stepped away, shaking his head. I was going to tell you, she said, her voice desperate. I didn't know how. The man, her husband, took a deep breath, and for the first time his voice cracked. You're pregnant, he said, looking at her stomach like he just realized. Aren't you? Lila's hands went at her stomach instinctively. I didn't want you to find out like this, she whispered. He looked like he might collapse. He put a hand on the back of a chair to steady himself. Jesus, Danielle, he said, his voice hoarse. I thought you were coming back. I thought we could fix it. But this. No one moved. No one even breathed. The whole room felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to crack. Lila's parents stood off to the side, their faces a mask of shock and betrayal. My mother's hand went to her mouth like she was about to be sick. Kieran's eyes were wide, his face pale, as he stared at the woman he thought he knew. And me? I was still by the door, unseen for once. I watched it all unfold, feeling like I was watching a play I'd seen 1,000 times before, a perfect image crumbling under the weight of real life. Lila looked around the room, her tears still falling. I'm sorry, she said again, her voice small and lost. I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to choose. And just like that, the perfect celebration turned into something raw and ugly. The truth lay bare for everyone to see, and the lies that held it all together finally came undone. The air in the room had turned heavy, like the aftermath of a storm. No one spoke as Lila, or Danielle, as we now knew her, sank to her knees, her hands shaking. Kieran stood there like a statue, his face pale, eyes blank. One by one, the guests began to slip away. Some left quickly, heads down, avoiding any more awkwardness. Others paused to squeeze Kieran's shoulder or murmur soft words to my mother. It didn't matter. The damage was done, and there was nothing polite small talk could fix. I watched as Lila's parents hovered beside her, their faces a mixture of disbelief and shame. Her mother tried to pull her up, but Lila just sat there, her shoulders hunched, crying quietly. The little boy, Caleb, stood beside his father, clinging to his toy airplane, his wide eyes darting between the adults. Kieran's parents looked like they didn't know what to do. His dad cleared his throat, then walked away without a word. His mom stared at Lila, her lips parted in horror, but she didn't say anything either. The pedestal they'd built for her had cracked wide open, and all they could do was stand there, watching it crumble. Finally, the man, her husband, picked up Caleb. He didn't say another word. He just held his son tight against his chest, his jaws set. Before he left, he looked at Lila one last time. I'm filing for full custody, he said quietly. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. She didn't argue. She just nodded, her eyes red and hollow. They left without another word. The door shut behind them with a quiet finality that felt louder than any of the laughter or music had been earlier. I looked over at my mother. She stood there, her face pale, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find the words. For once, she didn't have a comment or a judgment ready. She just looked, stunned. Kieran was still frozen in place. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just stared at the floor, like if he stayed still long enough, he might wake up and find it was all just a bad dream. I stayed where I was, watching it all from the edge of the room. I felt like a ghost, unnoticed and untouched by the chaos. Maybe for the first time, I realized that being invisible wasn't always a bad thing. Finally, I walked over to Kieran. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I just stood there beside him, close enough so he knew he wasn't alone. My mother turned to me then, her eyes wide and uncertain. She opened her mouth like she was about to say something, but then she closed it again. She looked around the room, at the half-eaten cake, the empty chairs, the discarded blue and silver decorations, and her shoulders slumped. For the first time in my life, she looked small. Like the weight of all those perfect appearances she'd worked so hard to keep up was finally too much to carry. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I just watched as the truth of everything we'd all been pretending cracked open for good. And in that quiet, broken moment, I realized something. All the years I'd spent trying to fit in, to prove I was enough, none of it had ever really mattered. Because in the end, the lie they'd all believed in was never mine to carry. I was standing by the window, watching the guests drift away one by one. Some were in hushed conversation on the porch, others just left quickly without saying a word. My mother was still in the living room, wringing her hands over and over, as if she could scrub away the shame and confusion with just her palms. I picked up my bag from the hallway. I'd had enough. There was nothing left for me here, no reason to keep pretending this was home. I was almost to the door when my mother's voice cut through the quiet. "Malik," she said sharply. "Wait." I turned back slowly. She was standing there with her shoulders squared, her lips pressed tight together like she was bracing for impact. "You knew, didn't you?" she said, her voice hard. "About Lila. About all of this. You knew, and you didn't say a word." I felt my eyebrows rise. "Excuse me." She took a step closer, her finger jabbing the air. "You always had a way of finding things out. I bet you knew. I bet you let this happen so you could see us humiliated." For a moment, I just stared at her. Then something inside me cracked. I let out a laugh, short and sharp, but with no humor in it. "Are you serious right now?" I said, my voice quiet and steady. She flinched like I'd slapped her. "Don't you take that tone with me," she snapped. I set my bag down and stepped forward, my heart hammering in my chest. "You think I planned this?" I said, my voice calm but clear. "You really believe I sat back and watched Lila ruin Kieran's life just to make you look bad?" Her mouth opened, then closed again. She didn't have an answer. "You've been looking for someone to blame," I said. "And as usual, it's easier to blame me than to face the truth, that you built this pedestal for Kieran and Lila, and never once wondered if any of it was real." Her shoulders sagged. "Malik, No," I cut in. "You don't get to put this on me. Not today." I shook my head slowly. "I'm done carrying your shame and your expectations around like they're mine. I'm done." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something like doubt in her eyes. She opened her mouth again, but no words came out. I picked up my bag and walked to the door. My hands were steady. My breath was even. I didn't look back as I stepped outside. The air was cool on my face, the sun just beginning to set over the lake. I could hear the faint sound of water lapping against the dock, and for a moment, I just stood there and let the silence settle over me. For the first time in years, I felt free. Not because anything had changed. Not because my family finally saw me for who I was. But because I finally saw them for what they were, and I knew I didn't have to keep proving myself to them anymore. I took a deep breath and walked down the path to my car, the gravel crunching under my feet. No anger. No regret. Just the simple, quiet certainty that I was done. 3 days later, I was back in Seattle, trying to settle into the rhythm of my own life again. My apartment was quiet, the way I liked it. But even so, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, about the way Kieran had looked at Lila, about the way my mother's face had fallen when I'd finally spoken the truth. I was making coffee one morning when my phone buzzed with a message from my father. "Can we meet?" It read, short and simple. I stared at it for a moment, then typed back, "Sure. Let me know where." We met at a small coffee shop near the waterfront, someplace neither of us had been before, neutral ground. My father was already sitting at a corner table when I arrived, his shoulders hunched like he was carrying the weight of the whole world on his back. "Malik," he said quietly when he saw me. He didn't smile. He didn't try to make small talk. He just gestured for me to sit down. For a moment, we sat there in silence, the hum of the espresso machine and the clatter of cups filling the space between us. I didn't know what to expect, an apology, maybe, or another round of excuses. But when my father finally spoke, his voice was soft. "I wanted to see you," he said. "To say, I'm sorry." I looked at him, surprised. He cleared his throat, his hands wrapped tight around his coffee cup. I know we didn't treat you right, he said. We were so focused on making sure Kieran was the perfect son, we forgot you were standing there too. We forgot that you were already enough. I didn't say anything. I just let his words wash over me, feeling the truth of them settle in my chest. My father sighed and ran a hand over his face. I'm not good at this, he admitted. I've spent so long pretending I knew what was best for everyone that I didn't see how much it was hurting you. I took a slow breath. Dad, I said, my voice steady, I've been trying to tell you that for years. I know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And I didn't want to hear it. I thought if I just kept pushing, if I just kept pretending, it would all work out. He looked up at me then, his eyes tired. But it didn't. And I'm sorry for that. I nodded, the words catching in my throat. Thank you, I said finally. I don't know if it changes everything, but thank you. He gave me a small, weary smile. I don't expect you to forget, he said. But I wanted you to know that I see you. That I've always seen you, even if I didn't know how to show it. For a long moment, we just sat there, the noise of the cafe fading into the background. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't some magic moment where everything was fixed. But it was something. A crack in the wall that had always been between us. When we stood up to leave, my father held out his hand. It was a simple gesture, but when I took it, it felt like more than just a handshake. It felt like a promise, one that said we were finally ready to see each other as we really were. As I walked back to my car, I felt something small and unfamiliar stirring in my chest. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. But it was the beginning of something close. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. A couple weeks later, word spread through the family. Lila had moved back in with her parents. She told everyone she needed emotional support, but nobody really bought it. Most people figured she was trying to find a safe place to land after her husband had left with their son. Rumors started floating around. My cousin Tiffany mentioned she'd heard that Lila's husband had filed for divorce and full custody, and that he'd already left the state. No one knew exactly where he went, but it was clear he wasn't coming back. I try not to think about it too much. I had my own life, my own work to focus on. But every time I saw Lila's name pop up in a family text thread or heard her name whispered in the background at a gathering, it left a bitter taste in my mouth. I ran into my mother at the grocery store one afternoon, near the dairy section. She looked tired, her face drawn tight. She was usually so quick to snap at me, but this time she just nodded and said, "Hello, Malik," in a soft voice. It was strange. She didn't ask if I was seeing anyone, didn't remind me how Kieran was doing so well, even now. She just stood there, staring at the price tag on a gallon of milk like it held all the answers to the mess we'd just survived. In the weeks that followed, the gossip kept going. Everyone had a theory about why Lila had lied, why she'd risked everything. Some blamed her for being reckless. Others said she was just desperate. But in the end, it didn't matter. She was no longer the graceful fiancée everyone praised. She was a cautionary tale, someone whose carefully crafted life had fallen apart in front of the whole family. And me? I felt no pleasure in any of it. Just a quiet, strange sense of clarity. I went back to the lake house one weekend to pick up some of my old things. My mother met me at the door. She didn't have that judgmental tone in her voice anymore. Instead, she spoke in short, careful sentences, like she was finally realizing that her words had weight, and she wasn't sure how to handle it. "You look well," she said, almost like she was surprised by it. "I am," I replied. And it was true. I wasn't hiding anymore, and I wasn't chasing anyone's approval. I'd built my own life, my own kind of success. And whether or not she understood, that didn't matter to me anymore. She nodded, her lips pressed together like she wanted to say something else, but couldn't find the right words. And maybe that was enough. Maybe it was a start. As I packed up the last box of my old camera gear, I caught a glimpse of the lake through the window. The water was calm, reflecting the late afternoon sky. And in that stillness, I felt light. Like I'd finally put something heavy down and walked away from it. The family pedestal had cracked. Lila's life had unraveled. And somehow, in the chaos of it all, I'd found a way to stand tall. Not out of spite. Not to prove a point. Just because, for the first time, I realized I didn't have to carry the weight of their judgments anymore. One afternoon, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Lila standing there, her hair pulled back in a messy bun and her eyes hollow. She looked nothing like the girl who'd smiled so easily at the engagement party. She looked worn down, like she'd finally run out of places to hide. "Malik," she said softly. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her pass. She stood in the middle of my living room, arms wrapped around herself like she was cold, even though it was warm outside. "I didn't come here to make excuses," she said quietly. I wanted to apologize. I didn't say anything. I just waited." She took a deep breath. "Not for what happened with Kieran. That's between me and him now. But for how I treated you. For how I always acted like you were less than me." Her voice cracked on that last part. She looked at me then, really looked at me. You never deserved that. You were always kind to me. You always treated me like I mattered. And I never gave you the same respect. I watched her for a moment, trying to figure out what to say. Part of me wanted to tell her to leave, that it wasn't my job to forgive her, to make her feel better. But another part of me, I don't know, maybe I just didn't want to carry the bitterness anymore. I forgive you, I said finally, my voice low. But I don't forget. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. That's fair. We stood there in silence for a while. She didn't ask for comfort, and I didn't offer any. There wasn't a sudden warmth or a rush of understanding. Just a quiet acceptance that things had changed. When she finally turned to leave, she paused at the door. I hope you know, she said, her voice soft. You were never the problem. It was me. It was always me. I didn't answer. I just gave her a small nod. She left without another word. And when the door clicked shut behind her, I stood there for a moment, feeling the quiet settle around me. There was no real relief, no dramatic ending. Just a small, important truth. She'd finally seen me. And I'd finally stopped letting her, or anyone else, tell me who I was. I went back to my desk, opened my laptop, and got back to work. I still had deadlines, still had dreams to chase. And for the first time in a long time, none of them had anything to do with trying to prove myself to someone else. Later that night, I was unpacking my camera bag, getting ready for a shoot I had planned for the weekend, when I found it. A small blue candle, wrapped in silver ribbon, a leftover party favor from the engagement party. I must have grabbed it by accident when I packed up my things. For a second, I just stared at it. It looked so perfect, so carefully designed, like the party had been, like Lila's perfect life had been. But now, it was just a candle in a paper wrapping, all the illusion stripped away. I set it on my coffee table and lit it. The flame flickered softly in the dim light of my living room. It wasn't a tribute to the failed celebration, or some kind of quiet grief for what had fallen apart. It was a reminder that I'd stood there, in the middle of that perfect lie, and I hadn't crumbled. I sat down in my chair and watched the candle burn. The soft blue light danced across the room, a small, quiet glow. It felt honest, simple, real. I thought about everything that had happened, about the family that never really saw me, about the pedestal they'd built and the way it had finally cracked. And I realized something. I'd been living on my own terms for years, even if they never saw it. I'd built a life out of the things that mattered to me. Travel, photography, a quiet apartment filled with memories of the places I'd been. And that was enough. More than enough. The candle burned lower, and I leaned back, opening my laptop. I pulled up the new photo series I'd been working on, images from my last trip to Arizona. Vast landscapes, open skies, endless horizons. It was a project I'd been putting off, always worried that I should be focusing on something that would make my family proud. But now it was mine alone. No expectations, no judgment, just my own work, my own vision. The candle flickered one last time, and I smiled to myself. I closed my laptop and let the quiet fill the room, a reminder that this was my life, one I'd shaped and claimed for myself. No apologies, no explanations. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me, something small but powerful. The weight of other people's dreams had finally fallen away, leaving me with only my own. And that, I realized, was all I needed.